and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. So if you are a seasoned Politico or you just want to find out what's going on in state government and get some of that inside baseball, we've got it for you all right here today. So today on the Debrief, we're going to be talking a lot about election laws, early voting, everything that you can expect. We have with us expert Dr. Andy Jackson of John Locke Foundation's Civitas Center for Public Integrity. We're also talking about the 80th anniversary of D-Day. To fill us in on all the details about that, of course, Donald Bryson, CEO of the John Locke Foundation, and what's going on in your state government. Brianna Kramer's been covering the state legislature this week, so she's got a lot of details, including some interesting information about the DMV, some big fireworks this week you need to know about. Okay, let's start with the anniversary of D-Day. Today's the 80th anniversary. Teenagers, basically, storming the beach, saving the world and defeating fascism. I mean, it sounds like a movie, but it was real.
Well, they've made plenty of movies about it.
Sure.
Right, and I'm wondering, what are people watching now? Are they going to watch Band of Brothers or The Longest Day or Saving Private Ryan? What are you going to watch tonight to commemorate it?
Sure.
But it's the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The invasion of Western Europe opened up the second front in the European theater and really marked sort of the end and the apex of Nazi Germany. And at a time when we have groups like Antifa on the left rising up to talk about what they perceive as fascism, which is really just us talking about lowering tax rates and school choice, right? This
not
is
actual fascism.
Not actual fascism. We're talking about an actual battle against actual fascists that killed people by the millions, right? Because of their sexual orientation or their race or their religion or whatever. It's lost on the current generation what this really means and how important it is. And as I have a column today out in Carolina Journal about the importance of remembering D-Day and what it actually meant. But I looked at the North Carolina Military Affairs Commission, the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, the state cultural and Natural Resources Division, and the Museum of History, and none of them had any events commemorating D-Day.
So weird to me.
It's bizarre to me, and it's the 80th anniversary. It's not the 32nd anniversary. It's not the 79th. It's the 80th anniversary, and so I think it's important to remember. And there are a lot of really good reasons to remember what happened. We lionize these veterans. We lionize, General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. storming the beaches with the troops when he's 56 years old. And that sort of thing, but we don't humanize them at the same time, right? This was a gigantic risk. People died. We look back on D-Day as if it's a fait accompli, like of course they won. And it wasn't, of course they won. Eisenhower put out a statement to the press on if they were successful and if they had failed and what they were going to do in evacuation. These people were terrified, but the fate of the free world depended on it. And it's important to remember that and what it means to live in a free world.
You mentioned that it may be lost on this generation. This is it's a really interesting point. So if you didn't know that it was D-Day, you're not alone. It doesn't seem like the state government understood.
No, apparently not.
And North Carolina, this is the greatest generation, and we're losing them more and more. This might be the very last huge anniversary that we have with them.
It probably is. I watched a lot of footage today, several different things going on in Normandy today, and they're honoring these veterans, but I mean, the youngest ones are 98 years old.
Wow.
Right? I watched the ceremony before we came in here to film this. They're giving a medal today in D.C. to a D-Day veteran who's 100 years old because he was 20. 20 years old. He was a kid. Now he couldn't buy a beer.
Sure.
But he's being honored for what he did 80 years ago.
The courage that this required is hard to put into words, what it
really
required to know they were marching into death.
To marching into death, and for what reason? The war wasn't here, right? It was over there, but it was because what Nazi Germany represented was a threat to the free world. And what does that mean? In his order of the day, General Eisenhower talked about the, liberty-loving people around the world are supporting you.
Sure.
And we say that and just gloss over it, but he really meant that when he wrote it.
Sure.
Liberty-loving people are supporting you. And are we still a liberty-loving people today? I think is the question where we are now if we forget what that meant, what D-Day meant 80 years ago.
Sure. Brianna, what are your thoughts? I know this was well before us, but it's such an important part of American history, even though it happened in Normandy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, liberty-loving, is that going to carry on into the future if we don't know the past? That's what I think. If we don't teach the young people our history and where we came from and everything that was sacrificed back then, then we just get complacent, content in where we are today, and then we see what's happening, the erosion of our liberties today.
Sure. Our values have changed. Have you ever run the what ifs, Andy? What if they hadn't been successful?
Well, I've seen the television miniseries on the what if, where the Nazis are running New York City, for example, and certainly the world would be a poorer place if not for the brave men who landed on the beaches at Normandy and helped bring an end to that war. A little over a year later, or a little under a year later, I should say. And so it is important to remember the sacrifices that were made to help preserve liberty, to oppose fascism. And this is something that carried on. It also sets up a context for what happened later with the development of NATO later on, where we were a leader in opposing communism and the spread of communism. And a lot, in the same vein, a lot of people forget that while not necessarily we were worried about, except for the movies, Russians storming our own beaches here, but there was a real concern that communism was on the march, and we were active participants in opposing that throughout the Cold War. So there are times when Americans have stood up to the challenge, and D-Day is definitely emblematic of that.
Right. Do you think that we're embracing those lessons in the next generation? I mean, you and I are about the same age, and I'm not sure that they are.
Well, we'd like to think so, and I think at least in word, you hear people saying they want to honor that. I think one of the grosser memes that I saw coming out of some of the protests in 2020 was this thing talking about Antifa of their day storming the beaches, and they had that famous picture of the Americans coming out, and they were trying to compare those protesters to the folks storming the beach. So it's kind of a stolen valor type thing. And it's a real shame that if people are confused about what it really means to struggle against actual fascism instead of just against your political opponents.
Sure. What are your thoughts?
No, I think we have to remember it, and we have to keep talking about it. People, we're the John Locke Foundation here at Carolina Journal, and people talk about, I don't want to hear about dead philosophers, but these dead philosophers had really good ideas. It's a Judeo-Christian value that there's really no new idea under the sun. We opposed fascism and then turned right around and opposed communism, because those, while they opposed each other, are still systems of thought that overvalue the power of the government, in that if the government has that much power, they can take away your individual rights, and that's what we fight against in both directions. Those are the values that we try to talk about here, and we have to continue to just bang that drum. But D-Day is just a very visceral representation of what that physically means when you have to physically fight for those rights.
Right. All right, speaking of rights, right to vote, right of the free press, right of all. Tell us what we had this week. The North Carolina State Board of Elections met a little early than in past cycles to approve early voting plans. So early voting opens October 17th. If you were an early voter, make sure that you mark that on your calendar, and the election, of course, November 5th. So tell me what your thoughts are about what we saw this week with the State Board of Elections.
Well, the first thing is, this is unusually early. Generally speaking, the State Board had requested county boards to submit their plans about 5 weeks before the start of mail voting, when mail ballots go out, which is around this first or second week of September. So you're looking at first week of August. That's their traditional start time. And they actually said this is a best practice because it gives the counties time over the early summer to find their sites, rent their sites, make sure they've got their plans in place, they can get their people ready. But it was a bit of a last-minute change. In April, they announced, no, we're not going to request this in August, which is what we have in the calendar. We're going to ask all you counties to submit your plans on May 7th. So they had about a 5-week notice to turn around and do all the stuff that normally takes a couple of months for them to do. And they had to do it while every county was conducting the second primary, because second primary wasn't done until May 17th. So this was a big rush job on the part of the counties in order to get these plans in. And they claim this is a way for the counties to have more time when in fact it gives them less time
right.
to find these plans. What was interesting is Karen Brinson Bell, who is the executive director of the State Board of Elections, kind of threw the chair of the State Board under the bus, once in her announcement of the change and then once to a committee of the General Assembly, where she said, it wasn't my idea, it was the idea of the State Board Chair, Alan Hirsch. I don't know if you can throw your boss under the bus, but she kind of did that, kind of passed the buck off to him about what they were doing. And there were complaints. There were at least some county boards who were complaining that they didn't have time to do this. Certainly, the Republican Party complained about this because there is a belief that this pushing up of the choosing may have something to do with an ongoing court case about the composition of the state board. There was a change in the law that said where we're going to go ahead, instead of having a 3-2 advantage for the party that has the governor's mansion, which happens to be the Democrats now, we're going to have an even division, which is what you think you would normally have with a board whose business is conducting an election and trying to make sure that's fair. That's been tied up in court, and there may or may not be a resolution over the course of summer, but this kind of nips it in the bud. They've gone ahead, they've made the decision, so even if the board changes, the plans made under the old board are probably going to be with us all the way to Election Day.
Sure. So then actually that begs the question. So there's two tracks. Had they held till August with a decision that came out, would there have been time to restructure all the state board, county boards, or was accelerating it a chance to make sure they lock it down with this composition?
Well, that's a little hard to say.
Sure.
Now, it would not take much to change the compositions of the boards. I would imagine that both parties are going to have their people in place.
Yeah,
normally you plan ahead
for
stuff like this. So you basically, it's a bit of a trigger mechanism. Oh, we won the court case. Well, here are our 3 new people that we want to have, or 2 new people that we want to have on the board. So they have those plans ready to roll. The flip side of that, though, is even if we had a change in the boards, I kind of think it's unlikely that we're going to have a change in the plans because these things have already been decided. They've already been announced. Even if you think there might be some of these plans that should be changed, it's going to be hard because the county boards have already started setting these things up. They started paying rent in some cases.
Right.
And so it's going to be difficult and could potentially lead to voter confusion if you start changing things in July that you have set in June.
Okay, all right. Now that's an important thing. Something else that came with the State Board of Elections, Sunday voting. So there were some plans. There were 11 counties that couldn't decide. So each county's in charge of laying out their Sunday voting or laying out their early voting plan. In the case of 11 different counties, they couldn't really come to a conclusion. They couldn't come to a unanimous consent on how this plan should go. In many cases, it was over Sunday voting. Now, this Democrat-controlled State Board of Elections approved all 11 plans. One Republican did not approve the ones that had Sunday voting in them. Tell me what your thoughts are on Sunday voting. This has been kind of a back and forth and sometimes divided really along party lines.
It has. So there's a couple of things to Sunday voting. One, there are churches all across North Carolina that serve as voting precincts.
Sure. Some
of them do it very willingly. Some are just, we know we're the only place in the community that can serve as a voting precinct, but it really disrupts the church, during their worship on Sundays. The another part of Sunday voting is the fact that a lot of those churches, particularly in urban areas, are African American churches, and it's been used. Well, it's been alleged, I want to say used, but it's been alleged that it's been used as a way to drive African American, primarily Democratic turnout.
Yeah, no, I think it's openly. Yeah.
And so, you're already at church, just go downstairs and vote, right?
Right.
And it's really easy to do that. And so, that's definitely part of the Democratic strategy.
Right.
And with a Democratic-dominated State Board of Elections, you can sort of see how this is going out. I also found it really interesting, as he was pointing out earlier, that Karen Brinson Bell, the person who has the job as executive director, threw her politically appointed boss as the State Board of Elections chair right under the bus, as if, maybe this was a political decision by the political appointee, and makes me wonder how these things are working out with Sunday voting as well.
Sure. So you alluded to Souls to the Polls. There were some letters that were filed. You can find them on the State Board of Elections website from people who are advocating for Sunday voting and openly said, look, this is a grassroots get out the vote effort, and a lot of communities, as part of their cultural unity, they go vote, are encouraged to vote before and after services. So this is a big part of it.
But it's not a grassroots get out the vote effort, right? It's not an independent organization. It's
No.
you're already at church, go downstairs to vote,
Sure.
right?
Right.
It's literally the church recruiting people to go vote, which
Right.
is it's iffy. It's
Sure.
It's a little iffy.
When you also have poll workers, who
Right.
a lot of them are elderly, and a lot of them need the break during that period of voting. So, I mean, it depends. You know, is it a matter of getting out votes, making sure everybody gets there, or is it, do you think, just, you know, a problem in the system?
Well, this also highlights another thing. We have 17 days of early voting
Sure.
in North Carolina, and some people may be confused that means you're going to have voting for 17 days. That's just the voting period.
Right.
The actual time is set by the county. So you have some counties that have Sunday voting and some that don't. You have some counties, or most counties, that have Saturday voting, at least one Saturday of voting. You have some counties that don't. This is set generally at the county level. There's no mandate that you actually have 17 days of early voting. And there's definitely a campaign strategy involved with Sunday voting.
Sure.
It does tend to tax resources. If you're in one of those counties and you're going to run all 17 days straight through, that means unless you've got a big rotation, and a lot of counties don't have this, you're going to be running your people ragged by the time you get to the end of the early voting period. So there is something to be said for having at least one Sunday off, having at least one day off where you can say all of the election workers can take this day off, recharge the batteries, and finish up the rest of the period strong.
Sure.
There has been some debate about whether or not we should have a shorter early voting period altogether, and a possible compromise would be, well, if we shorten this from 17 to a 10-day period and combine that with early voting on Sundays in every county, not just some counties, then you would have you'd have even rules for everybody across the state, and then also you'd have less of a burden on the counties, both financially and on the people working there. I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but that may be something worth looking at.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, what's next? We next have mail-out ballots. Mail-in ballots they're preparing to get them out.
Yeah, September 6th, I believe.
Okay.
And we have a site, it's Carolina Elections Vote Tracker, and so as soon as ballots start coming in, and one of the interesting things for me is they can start accepting ballots, the counties can start accepting ballots on the day that they mail them out. And almost invariably, you're going to have one or two ballots on the exact same day. And at first, how in the world
does that happen?
Is that going to get mailed back and counted on the same day?
Sure.
That's not what happens. And these are almost always military folks who they're using what's called a federal postcard ballot. And they're just filling in a couple of names for, if there's a Senate race in their state or for president, they'll fill that in and they can email that in. That's the only military personnel can do that.
Okay.
And so we could see our first votes in this election in North Carolina on September 6th.
Oh, wow. All right. Looking forward to it. All right, we're going to jump over to you, Brianna. Tell me a little bit. Lots of fireworks over the DMV. Of course, everybody makes jokes about the DMV, like standing in line, but it's making some of these lawmakers crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of ongoing issues with
Sure.
the DMV, long wait times. I mean, online, you can't even book an appointment for many months out.
And even when you book the appointment, I don't know if you've done that, you show up at the appointment and you're still waiting an hour and a half, even if you have an appointment.
Yeah, I was just recently in there, and
Sure.
you got to take your seat and have plenty of time to
A lot of
sit
people
there.
watching.
Yeah,
A lot of people
definitely.
watching.
Yeah, so the Senate Committee on Transportation is continuously trying to help with these issues at the DMV.
Okay.
And so yesterday and Wednesday, they had a meeting and they offered up some proposals to try to get things under control at the DMV.
Sure.
And so one of the things they're considering is changing who gets to appoint the commissioner of the DMV.
Who's Wayne Goodwin right now, right?
Yes, right now. So typically the Secretary of the Department of Transportation appoints that position.
Sure.
But they want it to be the governor that does it now, because that also helps them to get a little bit more involved in the process and help kind of oversee the qualifications.
Sure.
And
it seems like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
yeah, there's definitely some controversy. Some people were
Right.
not happy about it and
Sure.
saying the separation of powers.
Right.
That's not the role, and so there was some disagreement on that.
Right.
But they think that maybe that could help.
Okay.
So, and then another interesting thing is mobile driver's licenses.
Okay.
So that might be coming to North
All
Carolina.
right, tell me
soon.
what that means.
So it means your driver's license could be on your phone, so you could show that wherever
like in
you
my
go.
Google Wallet or
Like in-
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah,
Apple
so
Wallet,
like
Google
you know
Wallet,
how
yeah.
you can have the Apple Pay, or you know, your credit cards can even be on your phone.
Sure.
So your driver's license might be able to. So yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
What's your concerns? Is it a security issue?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a column last year for Carolina Journal about central bank digital currencies, how that's a bad idea because it would let the government overall track what purchases you make. And I can't quite work it out in my head because this is a new concept for me, but this feels similar in that way, as opposed to a physical card that the government doesn't always know where it is
Right.
or
So
whatever.
every time that QR code or that barcode is read, it goes somewhere.
Yeah, or like when I scan my Apple Pay or my Google Wallet or whatever at Lowe's Foods, how do I know somebody at the DMV is not checking where I'm going every day or something? I don't know. Maybe that's tinfoil hat of me, but it makes me feel a little icky.
I get it.
No, that's true.
Sure.
It's a concern, privacy concern for sure, but at the same time, with technology being everywhere all the time, it's, I think, probable to happen. And you know, it's happening in other states. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you thinking about this digital driver's license?
I'm sufficiently paranoid that I don't actually scan anything on my phone.
Really? You don't even use like an Apple Pay?
I'm one of those people. I mean, when I'm going on an airplane trip, I actually print out my boarding pass. I still do that because I just my paranoia is at a level where I don't know what else is getting scanned when they scan my phone. They could, you could have, I mean, if I was a clever digital criminal, if I could end up scanning everybody's data, can I get your banking information while somebody's scanning?
Never even thought of that.
Well, once again, maybe I'm being too paranoid, but if I was a clever airline employee, I'd figure out a way to purpose that scanner.
Right. Wow.
So that's just me. I will not. I will ask
you
for a
will not
physical
be doing
copy.
digital.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. All right, so what else is happening over there?
Yeah, there's a lot happening down at the General Assembly. School suspension policies, that's another thing. So I know we talked a lot about the illegal alien controversy at Central Davidson High
got
School.
suspended,
Right, so he was a sophomore suspended for 3 days for saying the word illegal alien in his classroom. And so now the Senate is considering some legislation to make sure that that can't happen again in that manner, so that parents and students can appeal a suspension if it's short term. So right now, a long-term suspension can be appealed. That's over 10 days.
Okay.
But anything under that can't be. And so the legislation proposed would offer 5-day suspensions or longer, the ability to appeal.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's funny that you would bring this up because Leah McGee, we had a good conversations with her very early in this process. Carolina Journal broke this story. Brianna broke this story about a month ago or so. At the time, she was pushed into the spotlight by this situation and had to stand up for her child. I mean, I think any of us would be in that situation that she was in and nervous. She made national news. She's meeting with Donald Trump all of a sudden in 5 days. She's on Fox News. She seems to have really embraced this moment in time.
Totally, yeah. It's great to see because she was overwhelmed at first. It overnight just blew up into a crazy story, and she didn't know what she had done, trying to expose what the school had done to her child.
Right.
What did Carolina Journal do to me?
Yeah.
Right. Seriously. I mean, we talked about that. I didn't want to put her in that situation, but the story had to get out.
Yes, but now that it's been 7 weeks, I think. She has
7
fully
weeks?
embraced this to make policy change. I mean, there's a lawsuit filed against the school. They just filed a preliminary injunction this week, actually. And they want to get that off his record, but the school board continues to not work with them.
Really?
Yeah, so this policy or this new law wouldn't affect her child, but she wants to do this for other students across the whole state of North Carolina, so that parents have this ability to appeal.
Well, you wake a mama bear, and you literally in 7 weeks she's got legislation. Very interesting.
Yeah, because she was down at the General Assembly yesterday meeting with senators, and she spoke to the committee. And yeah, she explained her story to them and why this needs to be a new law here. And so she's fully embraced it.
All right, good. So what's next for this law? Do you think we'll see it get through to a full vote this session?
Yes, there was pretty bipartisan support, it seemed.
Okay.
There wasn't a vote yesterday, but 2 Democrats did comment on it, and they were very supportive and thankful, actually, that it was brought up.
Wow.
By Senator Steve Jarvis, who's a Republican, but his Democrat colleagues were all in support of it.
Bipartisan, good, good. All right, when you were going to talk about one last thing that we have coming with public records, Carolina Journal was really involved in this last year when we had this with the budget.
Yes, so the Democrats in the General Assembly this week, in both the House and Senate, they introduced a bill to open up access to public records.
Okay.
So yeah, last fall the Republicans kind of snuck in some sort of legislation that limited access to records.
Sure, it allowed lawmakers to be the custodians, I guess, of their own records, which means they didn't think it was for public record. They could do whatever they wanted with it.
Yes, so this would try to disband what happened in the state budget last year.
Sure.
And so Democrats, are saying that they want open records for all. It's a bipartisan thing. And it used to be back in 2011, Republicans were the ones to do this, try to push for a constitutional amendment.
Okay.
And now we've kind of completely flipped.
Sure,
and it's
sure.
the Democrats.
What
So-
makes this different, being a constitutional amendment as opposed to a bill? Does it have a higher standard? It has to make
Well,
it grid?
it has a higher standard, and it's not unheard of for an open records and open meetings, I don't know, law to be in a state constitution. Florida, I believe, has this sort of thing in their state constitution, and it's good government. And I'm glad that someone has brought it up at the General Assembly. The problem is the way they've done it, I think, is more of a political ploy than actually being serious about it. That because one, they've done it. They picked one of the more left-wing members of the state Senate, Senator Greg Meyer, to present it.
Sure.
He does not have any friends in the Republican caucus, and that's the important part because Republicans have supermajorities in both chambers. So you're not going to move anything unless you get some members of the majority, particularly the majority leadership, on board. They've got no Republican co-sponsors, and then they held a press conference to take pot shots at Republicans, which, by the way, no one has ever been convinced by being called, two-faced or an idiot or anything like that. And so this was a political ploy more than they were actually serious about. It's good government. It's something the General Assembly should do. It just wasn't executed in the right way.
Sure. So do you think that the way they rolled it out, may have meant dead on arrival?
It is dead on arrival. I mean, it's going to go to the Rules Committee, where bills go to die a slow, quiet death. And so we're not going to see anything of it. Now, this could be, I mean, what would be nice is if you could take a look at the bill for a constitutional amendment that Republicans offered a few years ago. They're not exactly the same. There are some differences between the two. Take a look at this bill, and maybe in the long session next year have a serious bipartisan effort. Now, you're going to have to get Republican buy-in because it was Republicans that brought in the budget with their supermajority. I mean, even if they don't have a supermajority, they're likely to have a majority in the General Assembly. So you're going to at least need to have some Republican buy-in, particularly on the leadership side, to get this thing passed.
All right, we'll be watching it really closely. Thanks for tuning in to the Debrief. We will be back right next week with all the inside baseball from your state government. Have a great week.